Hello all you beautiful people, Gypsy Soul Creation here, and today we're going to start on what I would like to call the first part of probably a 3-part series, maybe longer, who knows where it'll take us. But upon request, I had some people wanting me to work on some of these. So today we're going to dive on into this one and let's see what we can create. Now with this piece, I'm going to sketch it out with a pencil. I've kind of learned my lesson from my last 2 pieces using the tracing paper. So by sketching it out by hand with a pencil, it is much easier to erase the unwanted lines when I'm finished with my burning, and still be able to have a little bit of structure that I want to follow. So one big mistake I made with this piece, let me just start right there, is I did not sand it first. Sand, guys. One thing that I have learned from this, besides the tracing paper tricks, is to make sure you sand your piece before using it. Even though this felt pretty smooth, it still had some rough spots. So once I got into my burning, it really didn't flow as smooth as it possibly could have. So again, you'll see me tracing out or sketching out a drawing, and just easy to erase when you're using a pencil. I really wasn't pressing too hard, kind of doing, the sketching a little soft, kind of coming up with a little bit of ideas. I had the idea of almost like a mandala type design, but something that would kind of flow with the structure of this fork and kind of fit in exactly where I needed it to fit into. So when I jump into the burning, I'm using the universal tip. I have my heat setting around 4, and I'm just kind of sketching out. Sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied on this one. Sketching out the lines that I want, indefinite lines. Some of it will be definitely lined through this piece, and there will also be some shading going into it. Probably not quite as much shading as if you're doing a big piece, but you definitely still want to add some depth to this. Throughout this series, I will be adding a spoon and a slotted spoon as well, upon request of someone who would love to have this in their kitchen for display. So this was kind of just going by imagination, I guess, sketching out a piece, and so using the universal tip, I'm just kind of going over those lines that I know I'm going to want solid lines. Again, this universal tip, using it straight up and down, you can get pretty fine lines throughout, and you can almost kind of sketch with it where you don't need such a structured solid line. Now I just slightly lean the tip sideways a little bit and pull down with it, which adds a little bit of depth and shading without being a solid line. I don't know how well you can see it from this angle, but as I spin the fork around the other way, I'm kind of pulling back in the other direction, adding a little more depth, again creating the look of a line without actually drawing a definite line, and adding the shade and the depth in through there. So this, I'm just very ever so lightly going over, creating some lines in the middle of this. I'm not pressing hard, I'm staying very light on it, and just creating the line effect through here to add a little bit of depth without such darkness, without really having it so overly structured. So again, sketching lightly, very ever so lightly, the inner piece of this circle as I'm creating. Now if you look down in the very center of those triangles, that little squiggly there, I kind of like a spiral, I did move slower and press harder to make that a darker, definite line. So these other pieces here, I'm taking light, short strokes, and I'm going to kind of build up the depth, the darkness that I want. This wood actually does burn pretty easy, and you know, you can kind of pick up, you can get better quality made wooden spoons and forks, or you could just simply go to the dollar store and grab a few to practice on. They cost $1. It's not going to hurt you if you know, mess something up or you're not happy with your end result. Take it lightly. Take it just out of pure creativity and enjoyment. Go down to the dollar store, grab a couple of these type of things for $1 and see what you can create. Let your imagination run wild with it. So make sure that you spin it around so that it's angled the right way. It's comfortable for you. It's easy for you to get the roundness that you're looking for. Like in these little scallops here, I have to move it so that I can continue the round flow. If I'm trying to cross over my own arm, I'm not going to get the right angle, and it's not going to be a flowing, rounded line. So now I move up into what's almost kind of the consistency of a flower petal, I would say, just with a lot of design and detail inside of it. And again, I was trying to come up with a design that would flow with the shape of this fork without overdoing it. I didn't want it to seem so solid, and I wanted to keep something very flowy but detailed enough to really capture the eye. Now, in these little angled pieces, in these little triangles, it was difficult to get those little pieces done without kind of blending them into each other, to keep them very separated. So in smaller detailed areas, you really do have to move slow and use a light, delicate hand with it. Now, going on these outside pieces, you can use a little heavier hand. You can flow with it a little more. You have a bigger area that you're working on. Now, on this outside piece of the wood is where I probably had the hardest, because I did not sand it. On that last edge piece there, it was the roughest part of the wood. So it got a little liney throughout my flow. It kind of broke up my flow a little bit right there in that section. So even trying to blend, I had to go over it several times to really get any burn in there. Now, had I sanded it prior, it would have flowed a lot smoother, and it would have burned a lot easier. So you can kind of see how choppy my line looks a little bit. Now I can go back in there with my shading, as I will do, and blend that in so that it doesn't stand out like that. But that just gives you the idea of the importance of sanding your piece before you really get started. Just learn from my mistakes, guys. I'm just really here to help you from a beginner's point of view. I had other people tell me, sand, don't press too hard, the things not to do, and I didn't listen. I went out there and I found out for myself. So take it from me, learn from my mistakes, the do's, not the don'ts. So again, going in, creating some heavier line in the end of this piece. I really wanted that to stand out a little more. And then I can just take this universal tip and lean it over sideways to kind of pull when I want to shade into that. So this probably is one of my favorite tips. This one and the pointier one that I will get into a little bit later on in this design that you will see next. But they both just flow from one use to another. So here you go. I'm jumping in with the pointed, kind of angled tip, and I'm trying to layer the darkness of it. Now, certain parts of it are burning pretty quickly. You can see how quickly that's darkening, but as I get down to the edge, I really have to kind of hold it there a little bit longer, keep going over it and keep working it, because without being sanded, it's really giving me a hard time of how much it's going to burn. So I'm kind of holding the tip there. I need to keep going over to blend that in so that it's not just a spot. I don't want it to look too spotty. Again, you can turn your heat up. If you get to an area like this, you can turn the heat up slightly, but I really recommend just working with it and being patient. Just keep going over it, moving your hand a little slower, you know, pulling away with it, and just keep layering and layering to get the darkness and the depth that you want. Because by turning the heat up too high, you might get a burn mark that is too dark that you can't hide, you can't get away from after that. So again, I suggest just keep going over and layering to add the depth that you really want to it. So because this tip is so pointed, it's easy to kind of get into those small areas, into shaping those tiny little areas like that. So, you know, I'm not really quite sure what happened to my video there. Kind of froze for a moment. Sorry about that, guys. Technical difficulties sometimes. So again, it's a beginner's journey, so you never know what's going to happen in my burned pieces. You never know what's going to happen in my technology, I'm not only a beginner into the pyrography world, but also a beginner into YouTube, and the YouTube channel, and my Instagram channel, and just my creations in general. So bear with me when I have some hiccups, but I promise you that I will try to get you the information to help you get started and learn from my mistakes and create just awesomely beautiful, beautiful pieces. So if you kind of look down to where that flower is kind of down towards the corner, you will see the triangles in the center that I've taken this tip and I've just kind of pulled from the edges into shade that. That's where I've added the depth and the shading that you can see. Now I can tip it up and I can use the very, very point of it in order to just slightly touch it quickly to add the little dots that I want throughout these scallops. And it burns very quickly in that way. I can use the very, very point to be able to create those very thin lines. And then I lay it down flat once again to kind of go around the edges, which I'm beginning to create now, and just add that shading that gives it more of a dimensional look. Instead of being so one-dimensional when you're done with your piece, if you go around and you just lay it flat, kind of pull away lightly. You can even turn the heat down slightly so that you're creating it a very light look, and you can layer as you want, but it adds that depth. It gives it more of a dimensional look. You can create more of a two-dimensional or even a three-dimensional look by just adding the shading. So be patient when you get into that, and know that as you add layers, it's going to take some time. So jumping back into some of these scallops here, I'm just laying it flat. I'm going into the top of the scallop and just pulling down away, which is adding a little light shading and a little definition to them. It really brings out the roundness to it without taking away from, you know, the dots that I have in there and the different textures of the design. We don't want to take away from the texture. We want to actually emphasize the texture. So pulling away is just adding some slight definition to it. So if you need to go back in, you need to touch up like I just did some of the little dots. Just tip it, turn it, and touch the very tip down. This works great when you don't want to have to change the tips out constantly. Now here I'm back to the universal burner, and I'm going to go in and create some more definition through this part that's been so hard for me to burn. When you have tips like this, like the two that I've been using a lot, and you can create so much with it, it helps from not having to change the tips out. Now in this particular pin, which is the Walnut Hollow Creative Burner, it is very easy. Comes with a special pair of pliers. You just pull that tip off. It cools down very quickly. Shut the machine off, pull the tip out, pop the next tip in, and you could change it relatively quick, but not all burners are like that. So to find universal is just such a joy. So here I have now switched it up a little bit to the ballpoint tip. And I decided once I was working on the top that the rest of the fork looked so naked, it really just needed something. So just by taking a few little circles down the handle, on the top of the handle and then down at the base of the handle, it really just gives it a little something. It kind of blends in the flow and just creates that little bit of flow to it so that it doesn't look so empty with just so much heavy artistic design at the top. So the top circles, I am kind of going around with the ballpoint tip, but I'm leaving them hollow in the center. I'm just creating the line around the outside circle of it, and so that it gives it a little dimension, a little something without being too heavy. Now at the bottom of the handle, because there is no other design anywhere close to this, I'm going around, I'm going to outline it, but then I'm going to color it in. This just adds a little draw to the eye. So you're seeing all of the heavy design at the top of the fork, and then it kind of lightly goes down with the empty circles, but as you reach the bottom of the fork handle, it really, to color it in and add a little depth to it, it kind of draws the eye down so that it doesn't look like just this blob at the top of a fork and the rest of it is just this empty piece. So it really just kind of helps with the flow. And really just look at it, guys, eyeball it, see what you think is going to blend your design, see what you think is going to help your design. You might just like it with just the top done and nothing down the handle, or you might want to add a whole lot more down the handle. I didn't want to take away from my design, but I wanted to keep the flow going through the entire piece. So that is why I carried it all the way down the handle. So now looking back at the top, I still kind of feel like it's missing something. What is it missing? It's just missing a little depth. It's just missing a little shading. So I kind of turned my pen down slightly, about a 3.5, and I'm just going in and kind of angling this tip a little flat, but going with the flow and the angle, the shape of the top of this fork, just to add a little bit of texture, a little bit of dimension to the top of the fork down into the handle. Again, I just felt like the design at the top just needed a little more flow to it, just needed a little extra punch to really attract the eye, to really make it look like a standout piece. Again, you could be as simple or as detailed as you want. It's your piece. You're creating whatever you want to create. So I'm just going in on the other side, adding the same type of shading, laying that piece, that tip flat, and just adding the shading and the texture. It just gives it a flow. Wait till you see the finished piece. You will see how by just going in and adding these little details at the end, it kind of creates the whole flow through the whole piece, and it just creates a more beautiful piece. I think you will be very happy with it. Any lines that I kind of sketched out slightly with the pencil to see where it was that I wanted to create, I just grab an eraser and I just quickly erase them. Totally different than when I was using the tracing paper. So the next few pieces I'm probably going to create by just sketching out my own designs with my own pencil. And if you can't do that, it's okay to use tracing paper. Just trace lightly so that you can erase your lines better or blend them better with your burning. So I really hope that you guys appreciate these pieces. I am going to be jumping into a spoon and a slotted spoon as well, so that it is a 3-piece set, because I had somebody request that who would love to have it in their kitchen. So I hope that you guys can appreciate this piece. I hope that you jump onto my channel to watch the next parts of what I'm creating. Hit the subscribe button, subscribe so that you can always catch my creation.